The office door swung open, revealing Sarah, her face blotchy, tears tracing paths through perfectly applied makeup. Frank Jensen, CEO, stood behind her, a hand resting lightly on her shoulder as he addressed the hushed reception area. "Just a little disagreement about project priorities," he chuckled, his eyes fixed on me, a warning in their depths. Sarah recoiled, stripped bare by his casual dismissal, and I felt the cold realization that our life was no longer our own. My days at Miller's Auto were predictable, the smell of oil and gasoline a constant companion. Engines whined, wrenches clanked, and the small town of Fairview hummed outside the garage doors. I liked the work. It was honest. I came home each evening, usually around 5:30, to the quiet comfort of our modest house on Elm Street. Sarah would often be there, or she would arrive shortly after, bringing with her the crisp, slightly antiseptic scent of her office. We had a simple life, a good life, I thought. We ate dinner, talked about our day, and sometimes watched a little television before turning in. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and it felt secure. Sarah worked at Jensen Construction, an assistant manager, climbing the ladder slowly but surely. Lately, though, the pa had taken more out of her. She'd come home with a tightness around her eyes, a set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. Her stories about work shifted from mild complaints about paperwork to hushed mentions of Frank Jensen, the CEO. Frank was a local legend, a self-made man who'd built his company from a single truck and a strong back into the biggest construction firm in 3 counties. His picture was in the local paper often, always smiling, always shaking hands. But whispers followed him too, quiet talk and hushed tones at the diner, rumors of a sharp edge beneath the polished surface. I didn't pay them much mind. Sarah admired Frank's drive, his success. That was enough for me. The changes started subtly. Sarah began coming home later, sometimes pushing past 7, her explanations vague about last-minute reports or client calls. Her easy laughter grew less frequent. She'd be more quiet at dinner, picking at her food, her gaze often fixed somewhere beyond the kitchen window. The comfortable rhythm of our evenings began to feel off-kilter, like a tire that needed balancing. I got my first real look at Frank Jensen at the company Christmas party in early December. The event was held at the Fairview Country Club, all twinkling lights and forced cheer. Sarah looked beautiful in a navy dress she'd saved for the occasion, but her smile seemed stretched thin. Frank, a man in his late 50s with slicked back gray hair in a tailor-made suit, worked the room like a politician. When Sarah introduced us, he gripped my hand a little too long, his eyes, the color of slate, taking me in with an unnerving thoroughness. "So, you're the mechanic," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Good, honest work. Keeping the wheels turning, eh?" He chuckled, then turned his gaze to Sarah, holding it for a beat too long. "Sarah here, she's a real asset, got a sharp mind, and a captivating presence." The way he said captivating presence made my skin crawl. He dismissed me with a nod then, moving on to another employee, but his eyes kept drifting back to Sarah for the rest of the evening. I told myself it was just a boss admiring his employee, a powerful man being charming. Sarah seemed unfazed, even pleased by his attention. I trusted her judgment, but the memory of his gaze, sharp and possessive, settled deep in my gut, a dull ache I couldn't quite shake. Weeks passed, the unease growing slow and steady. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening in January, Sarah came home after 9. The sound of her keys in the lock was hesitant. When she stepped inside, her face was blotchy, streaked with the mascara. Her shoulders were hunched, and she held her purse tight against her stomach. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice tight. She just shook her head, sinking onto the living room couch without taking off her coat. The rain outside lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm in her eyes. Frank, she whispered, her voice raw. He called me into his office again. He said I wasn't getting along with the team, not integrating properly. She looked up at me, tears welling again. "But it's not the team, Dave, it's him. He wants me to stay after hours alone. He makes these comments, little touches." Her voice broke. "Tonight he said if I didn't get along, my upcoming promotion might be in jeopardy. And my job too," he implied. A cold rage spread through me, making my hands clench. Quit, I said the word a rasp. Quit that job tomorrow, Sarah. You don't need that. We'll figure it out. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't, Dave, not now. The promotion, it's huge. And the down payment for the house. We've been saving for so long. Her voice was full of a desperate pleading. We had dreamed of that small ranch house just outside town, a place with a yard for a dog. It had been our future, concrete and real. Now it felt like a cage. I feel so dirty, she choked out. And I keep wondering if I did something, if I encouraged him somehow. She looked small on the couch, lost like a child. My heart twisted. I knew she hadn't. This wasn't her fault. It was his. I sat beside her, pulling her close. Her body was stiff, trembling. My mind raced, anger warring with a fierce need to protect her. He couldn't get away with this. Not with Sarah. I remembered Tom Evans, my old high school buddy. Tom had been a cop for years before an injury had him pivot to private security. He knew how the world worked outside the law, how to find things people wanted to keep hidden. We need proof, Sarah, I said, my voice low and steady. Hard evidence against him, something that will stick. Well, I pulled away, looking into her tear-filled eyes. I know someone who can help us get it. A plan, rough and unformed, began to take shape. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Team Miller versus Frank Jensen, I declared, my voice gaining strength. My money's on Team Miller. We're scrappier. The house was quiet later that night, the rain still drumming against the roof, a monotonous rhythm. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I found Sarah in the kitchen, staring into the dark backyard, a cold cup of tea on the counter beside her. The only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the window, making her profile a stark silhouette. Still awake? I asked, my voice low. She nodded, not turning. Can't sleep. Just keeps going through my head. What if I misinterpreted him? What if I made it worse? Her voice was small, hesitant, riddled with a doubt that twisted my gut. I walked over and put my arms around her, resting my chin on her shoulder. Her body felt rigid beneath my touch. You didn't misinterpret anything, Sarah, and you didn't do anything to make it worse. He's the one with the power, the one who's twisting things. That's how these men operate. They make you feel like it's your fault because it's easier than facing what they are. I squeezed her gently. It's an unfair fight, him against you, with his money and his position, but we're going to level that playing field together. The next day at the shop, the usual clang and hum felt like a world away. During my lunch break, I found a quiet corner near the spare tire rack and pulled out my phone. My hand felt a little shaky as I dialed Tom's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff but friendly. Dave Miller, is that you? Long time no hear. How's the wrench turning business? Tom asked. Hey, Tom. Yeah, still turning wrenches. How's security? I forced a chuckle, trying to sound casual. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, talking about high school football and the rising cost of gas. Then I took a breath. Listen, Tom, I wouldn't call you unless it was important. I've got a situation, a real bad one, and I could use your advice. Maybe more than advice. There was a pause on the other end. Go on, Dave, you know me. I listen. I carefully started, choosing my words. It's about Sarah, her boss, Frank Jensen. He's been making things difficult for her at work. More than difficult. It started subtle, but it's gotten worse. Comments, touches, implying that her job and a big promotion she's up for depend on her getting along with him. I detailed the veiled threats, the late nights, Sarah's distress. He's got her cornered, Tom. He's powerful, well-connected in this town. He makes her feel like she's got nowhere to go. Tom listened, not interrupting, his silence heavy on the line. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. Textbook, Dave. This is textbook harassment. The implied threats, the leveraging of power. It's ugly stuff. His voice was calm, professional, a stark contrast to the churning in my stomach. The problem, as you already know, is proving it. His word against hers, and he's got all the leverage. We need solid evidence, Dave. Something undeniable. What kind of evidence? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Audio mainly. Do you know about Virginia's laws on recording conversations? Not really, I just know it's tricky. It's a one-party consent state for audio recordings, Tom explained, his voice flat. That means if one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal. Sarah could record him without his knowledge as long as she's present in the conversation. Video's different, but audio, that's doable. A flicker of hope, cold and small, ignited within me. So she could record him? She could, but it's not as simple as just hitting record. He's smart. He's not going to say sleep with me or you're fired. It'll be coded, implied. That's why we need to be smart too. Tom continued, first, start documenting everything. Every single incident. Dates, times about, exact words, context, even if it seems minor. Look for any potential witnesses, other women he might have done this to, or even just colleagues who might have noticed odd behavior. Okay, I said, already picturing a notebook and pen. And I'll make a few discreet calls, Tom added. I've got a contact, a lawyer who specializes in workplace investigations. I can run it by him anonymously, get some further recommendations without tipping anyone off. A grim warning followed. Be aware, Dave, when you go up against someone like Jensen, someone with power and money, they don't just roll over. They fight back, and often they fight dirty. Character assassination campaigns, making the victim look unstable, unreliable. They'll try to turn Sarah into the problem. His words sent a chill down my spine. The image of Sarah, already fragile, being torn apart by public scrutiny, was a hard one to stomach. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting Jensen win, was worse. We're going to proceed, Tom. We have to. Good man, Tom said. I figured you would. Just know I'm a phone call away for backup. Don't hesitate. He paused. Look, how about I swing by your apartment tomorrow evening? Say 7? We can talk strategy face to face, and I can bring some of the right tools for recording. Discreet stuff. 7 works, I said, a sense of grim purpose settling over me. Thanks, Tom, really. Don't mention it, Dave. See you then. After the call, I went back to tightening lug nuts, but my mind was elsewhere. The thought of Tom's visit, of what we were about to embark on, filled me with a mixture of dread and a fierce, protective resolve. When I got home, I told Sarah everything. She listened, her face pale, but in her eyes, I saw a flicker of that same resolve. We spent the rest of the evening making a timeline, scribbling notes on a pad of paper, recounting every unsettling interaction, preparing for a fight we never wanted. Tom Evans arrived at our apartment promptly at 7 the next evening, carrying a nondescript briefcase. He was taller than I remembered, his frame solid from years of police work, now softened slightly by time. He nodded a greeting to Sarah, his eyes taking in her pale face with a professional kind of sympathy. After a moment of small talk about the weather, he unlatched the briefcase and pulled out a device no bigger than my thumb. It was a black rectangle, smooth plastic, with a tiny microphone grill. This is it, Tom said, placing it on the coffee table between us. Voice activated, good battery life, very sensitive. He demonstrated how to turn it on, how to check the indicator light, and how to download the files to a computer later. It can be tucked into a bra, a jacket pocket, or even held discreetly in her hand if she's careful. Sarah's gaze was fixed on the small device, then flickered to the closed apartment door. Her hands were clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if he finds it? What if someone sees me? He'd fire me on the spot, Dave, or worse, he could make things so much worse. Her fear was a palpable thing in the small living room. I reached across and took her hand. It was cold. This isn't about getting even, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. It's about getting free, about protecting your dignity, and our future, that house down payment, everything we've worked for. This is the only way to make him stop. I looked at Tom, then back at Sarah. We can't just let him walk all over you. Her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with a mix of terror and resignation. She looked at the recorder again, then at me. Slowly, a flush of color rose in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something harder, something that had been simmering beneath her fear. The deep-seated anger at Frank's games, at his manipulation, began to assert itself. She took a deep breath, a shaky intake of air. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Okay, I'll do it." There was a new, fragile resolve in her eyes, a hardening around the edges. Over the next few days, the tension in our apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah went to work each morning with the tiny recorder tucked into her purse, a knot of dread in her stomach. Each evening she'd return, weary and frustrated. He just, he doesn't say anything specific," she'd report, slumping onto the couch. "He talks about synergy and professionalism. He gives these long speeches about company values. Or he just avoids me." Frank was cautious, a predator who knew how to stalk his prey without leaving obvious tracks. He scheduled more private meetings, invitations to lunch that Sarah politely declined, always under the watchful eyes of other employees. The constant proximity, the forced smiles, began to wear her down. He'd call her into his office, closing the door, then lean back in his chair, talking about her attitude. "You know, Sarah," he'd say, his voice smooth, "we need team players here, people who are fully committed. I'm not sure you're quite gelling with the Jensen family ethos. Some of your decisions, your interactions, they seem a little resistant to change, to what's best for the company." The words were innocuous enough on their own, but the implication was clear. Conform to his expectations or face the consequences. He wasn't talking about spreadsheets, he was talking about her. The emotional toll mounted visibly. Sarah moved through the evenings with a quiet urgency, her eyes shadowed, her smile a distant memory. The constant surveillance, the fear of discovery, and Frank's insidious psychological manipulation were weighing heavily on her niche. She picked at her food, woke up in the middle of the night, sometimes crying silently into her pillow. I could feel her pulling away, consumed by the darkness of her workdays. Then one Tuesday afternoon, she finally got something. She came home, not just weary, but with a strange, fierce triumph in her eyes. "He did it," she said, her voice trembling. "He finally said it." We sat at the kitchen table, the laptop open. Her fingers, still shaking, connected the tiny device. I hit play. The recording was a little muffled at first, the ambient office noise. Then Frank's voice, clear and chilling, filled the small space. "Sarah," he said, his tone dropping from smooth to sharp, "we've had this conversation before. Your future here depends on your ability to adapt, to be a team player. Your attitude, frankly, is becoming a liability. I've heard some things. People are talking. If you can't align with the company's vision, with my vision for the kind of talent we foster here, then perhaps Jensen Construction isn't the right fit for you. And if you think you can just walk away and find something better, you'll be surprised how small this town is, how word gets around." His voice was low, laced with a venomous confidence. It wasn't about work performance. It was a personal threat, a cold, calculated intimidation. We listened to it twice, then a third time. Relief, cold and hard, settled in my chest alongside a renewed wave of disgust for the man. The proof was there, concrete, unmistakable. I called Tom. He listened to the recording, his breathing steady on the line. "That's good, Dave. Very good. That's explicit enough to show a pattern of harassment and retaliation, especially that last part about the town being small. That's a direct threat to her career and reputation." He paused. "But to really protect Sarah and to secure a definitive win against a man like Jensen, we might need a little more, a sustained pattern. One incident a month, even a strong one, can be spun. 2 or 3, showing a clear escalation, that's much harder to deny." The clear recording had given Sarah a fragile courage. She continued to carry the small device, tucking it carefully into her blazer pocket each morning, a silent sentinel against the day's uncertainties. She was more watchful, more deliberate in her interactions with Frank. But Frank Jensen, it seemed, was a man who adapted. He didn't revert to explicit threats. Instead, his approach grew softer, more insidious. He began to isolate her, subtly shifting her responsibilities, making her the sole point of contact for critical projects. He'd praise her in public, making her seem indispensable, yet privately ensure that her access to other senior management was limited, always funneling her through him. He made her dependent, not just on the job itself, but on his personal approval, his good graces. Sarah, he'd say, leaning back in his executive chair, you're a vital part of my inner circle. You understand my vision like no one else. That kind of loyalty, that trust, it gets rewarded. It's how people truly get ahead here. It's how we operate. The we felt possessive, personal, implying a shared secret, a bond that went beyond the office walls. Sarah started coming home even later than before. 8 o'clock became the new 5:30, sometimes 9. Her excuses became even thinner, delivered with a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, her presence there but not entirely present. The stress had been a visible weight before, but now there was something new, a deeper sadness in her gaze, a profound distance I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the anger, the fear, or the job-related exhaustion that had previously shadowed her. This was something else. I sensed a shift, subtle at first, then undeniable. A growing chasm opened between us, colder and more isolating than any fear or stress from the job. Our easy banter faded. Our quiet evenings together, once a comfort, became strained, filled with unspoken things. It felt like something fundamental was eroding, like the very ground beneath our feet was becoming less solid. One Tuesday evening, nearly a month after her first clear recording, Sarah arrived home just before 10. She looked utterly drained, her face pale, her hair slightly disheveled. She handed me the recorder without a word, then went straight to the bedroom, closing the door softly. I walked into the kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. I connected the tiny device to my laptop, expecting to hear more of Frank's coded threats, more of his manipulative rhetoric. I was ready to feel the familiar surge of anger at him, the protective fury for Sarah. The audio began, the familiar office sounds, a chair scraping, a faint chime of a phone. Then Frank's voice, lower than usual, almost a purr. "Come on, Sarah," he said, and the intimacy in his tone was like a physical blow. "You know you want this. We're good together. It's just business." And then Sarah's voice, not angry, not defiant, but strained, forced, almost a whimper. "Frank, please." My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the laptop, my fingers hovering over the volume control. The conversation continued, Frank's voice a persistent, low murmur. Sarah's responses growing quieter, more resigned. There were pauses, moments of silence broken by indistinct rustling sounds, soft sighs that didn't belong to a professional meeting. Whispers. Then a distinct, unmistakable sound, followed by Sarah's muffled gasp, a sound of profound submission rather than surprise. A chilling realization washed over me, cold as ice water poured directly into my veins. This wasn't just harassment. This wasn't just coercion. This was something far more intimate, far more devastating. My world shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. The undeniable truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Infidelity. Not just Frank Jensen forcing himself on her, but Sarah, complicit, however unwillingly, in a profound personal betrayal. I ripped the recorder from the laptop, my hands trembling. I walked to the bedroom, the device clutched tight in my fist. Sarah was already in bed, turned away from me, her back to the door. "Sarah," I said, my voice raw, unrecognizable even to myself. "What was that? What was on that recording?" The accusation tore through the quiet apartment, shattering the last vestiges of our fragile peace. She flinched, then slowly turned. Her eyes, red and swollen, met mine. For a long moment, she just stared, then her face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent at first. Then a ragged sob broke free. He cornered me, Dave," she choked out, her voice breaking. "He said if I didn't show him loyalty, everything would be gone. My job, my career, our house. He said he'd make sure I never worked in this town again." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I was so scared, Dave. So utterly terrified. I couldn't see a way out. And the shame, God, the shame. Her confession hung heavy in the air, a gaping, festering wound opened between us. The anger I felt towards Frank was still there, a burning ember, but it was eclipsed by the profound ache in my chest. The betrayal burned hotter than any fury. The very foundation of our life together, the quiet comfort, the unspoken trust, was crumbling beneath my feet. The apartment, usually a haven of quiet comfort, became a battlefield of silence and accusation. Sarah's confession hung in the air, a poisonous fog, suffocating us both. The bed, the couch, the kitchen table, every surface now seemed to hold the echo of her words, of my shattered disbelief. We were reeling, two separate islands in a sea of devastation. Sarah, still crying, recounted the agonizing details, her voice thick with shame. He, he had me. He made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, not only would I lose my job, but he'd spread rumors. He'd tell everyone I was incompetent, difficult to work with. He'd make sure no one else in town would hire me. She looked up, her eyes pleading. He talked about the house, Dave. Our dream. He twisted everything. He made me feel like I had no choice, that it was the only way to save us, to save our future. Frank had exploited her ambition, her terror, her desperate desire to build a life with me. He had used her dreams as a weapon. I listened, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, had done this. The circumstances, the coercion, the fear. I understood them intellectually, but my gut wrenched, struggling to reconcile the Sarah I knew with the painful, undeniable truth of her actions. My protective anger towards Frank, a fury that had been a constant companion, now battled fiercely with a deep, personal sense of betrayal that cut me to the bone. It felt like being ripped in half. How could you? I finally choked out, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. How could you let him do that? How could you let him touch you? The words, once spoken, felt like acid in my mouth. She flinched as if struck. What was I supposed to do, Dave? Fight him off? Yell? What then? What would that have accomplished? He would have destroyed me, destroyed us. Tears streamed down her face. I hate myself for it. Every single moment since, I've hated myself. I felt so dirty. I couldn't even look at you without feeling like a fraud. We argued then, the silence breaking into sharp, bitter words, flowing freely like a poisoned river. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down both our faces as we confronted the shattered pieces of our once unbreakable trust. Sarah kept repeating, I've ruined everything. Everything we had. I know it to him. Her despair was palpable, a heavy cloak she wore. Later that night, the apartment still thick with unspoken grief and recrimination, I found myself dialing Tom Evans again. My voice was strained, raw, as I laid out the devastating turn of events, the full, ugly truth of Sarah's confession, the sounds on the recording. I left nothing out. Tom listened, his usual calm replaced by a stunned silence. Jesus, Dave, he finally said, his voice low. I'm sorry, that's rough, real rough. His focus shifted from legal strategy to moral support, acknowledging the immense, agonizing complexity of the situation. Look, legally that recording, it changes things. It's not just harassment anymore. It's sexual assault by coercion. But putting that out there, using it, it's going to be brutal, Dave, for both of you. It'll be a public trial. They'll pick apart everything, every detail of what she said, what she did, and they'll use it against her, against you. He continued, his voice grim. The defense will try to paint it as consensual, as an affair. They'll drag her name through the mud, twist her words, try to find any angle to discredit her. And if you go after Jensen with this, every dirty detail will come out. Everything you just told me. It'll be on the front page of every local paper. Your neighbors, your friends, her colleagues, they'll all know. His words painted a stark, unflinching picture. I wrestled with it, the fervent desire for vengeance against Frank battling with the painful, exposed reality of Sarah's involvement. Could I put her through that? Could I put us through that? The idea of exposing Sarah, of having her shame laid bare for the entire community to pick apart, was almost as unbearable as the betrayal itself. What was the cost? What was the point? Dave, Sarah pleaded from the bedroom doorway, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide and wet. She had heard my half of the conversation. Please, please don't leave me. I know I messed up, but I couldn't lose you, couldn't lose us. That was my biggest fear. Tell me you understand. It wasn't just forgiveness she sought, but understanding, a lifeline in the wreckage of our life. The air grew heavy with our choices, their weight pressing down. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The days that followed Sarah's confession were a blur of raw emotion, thick silence, and agonizing deliberation. Our small apartment felt vast, filled with unsaid words and the weight of shattered trust. We walked around each other, two wounded animals circling, unable to fully connect, yet equally unable to part. The option of walking away, of letting Frank Jensen win, felt like surrender, like a final capitulation to a monster who had already taken so much. Slowly, painfully, a decision began to form, not born of healing, but of shared, albeit fractured, resolve. We would confront him, on our own terms. Dave, hardened by the acid of betrayal, felt his anger fracture into distinct currents. One part still seethed at Frank, a cold, burning desire for justice. The other, a deep, persistent ache, was directed inward, towards Sarah, towards the fractured pieces of what we had. Yet, beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness remained for what was left of our marriage. I channeled this complex, contradictory anger into a clear, grim purpose. We would fight. Tom Evans became our anchor, a calm, steady presence in the storm. He helped us navigate the treacherous waters, crafting a precise strategy that balanced the pursuit of justice for the harassment with the agonizing necessity of minimizing Sarah's public shame and exposure. We hit him where it hurts most, Tom advised, his voice low and firm. His reputation, his business. We don't need a public spectacle if we can make him understand the cost. The plan was simple, direct, and risky. We would present Frank with all the recordings, including the more incriminating ones, in a private, carefully orchestrated meeting. The goal was to force his hand without drawing public attention to the most painful details of Sarah's ordeal. We set it up through Tom's contact, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in the next town over, who arranged a meeting at a neutral office. Frank Jensen walked into that meeting radiating smug confidence. His suit was impeccable, his smile broad and dismissive as he settled across the table from Sarah, myself, and the lawyer. He nodded curtly at me, a condescending gesture, then ignored me completely, focusing his steely gaze on Sarah. "So, Sarah," he began, his voice smooth, "what's all this about? Trying to shake me down, are we?" The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Henderson with eyes that missed nothing, simply pushed a small digital recorder across the table. "Mr. Jensen," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, "we have some audio we'd like you to hear." The first recording played, Frank's voice, confident and threatening, discussing Sarah's attitude and the smallness of the town. His expression barely flickered. Then came the second and the third, a pattern of subtle manipulation, of escalating pressure. With each one, the smugness on Frank's face began to crack. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. Then came the last recording, the one that had shattered my world. Frank's voice, intimately coercive. Sarah's strained responses. The rustling, the whispers, her muffled gasp. As the audio played, Frank Jensen's face, usually so composed, visibly paled. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly white. His mouth, which had been set in a sneer, now hung slightly open. The recording revealed his true, manipulative, predatory nature with an undeniable clarity. He attempted to bluff, of course. This is edited, fabricated. You're trying to blackmail me," he blustered, his voice cracking slightly. He threatened legal action, claiming slander, defamation. But the clear, continuous recordings were irrefutable. The lawyer had a timeline, a transcript, and an expert affidavit verifying their authenticity. There was no room for doubt. I watched him, my hands clenched under the table, the turmoil inside me a bitter ocean. But my voice, when it came, was steady, clear. "Mr. Jensen," I said, meeting his now frightened gaze, "you have two choices. You can resign from Jensen Construction immediately, effective today. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement ensuring you never speak ill of Sarah or this company again. In return, Sarah receives her promotion, a significant severance package, and full references. Or, I continued, we take all of this, every word, every sound, and we release it to the press, the state's attorney, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We will bring ruinous legal action, and every client, every business associate, every person in this town will know exactly what kind of man you are. Frank Jensen, his carefully constructed empire and polished public persona on the brink of collapse, finally deflated. His bravado crumbled, leaving behind a terrified, exposed man. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting between me, Sarah, and the unyielding lawyer. I'll agree, he croaked, his voice barely audible. The agreement was drafted, signed, and witnessed within the hour. Frank Jensen's public image was shattered. The rumor started immediately. A sudden resignation for personal reasons, whispered tales of scandal. He slowly faded from prominence, his name now spoken with a hint of disdain rather than respect. Sarah received her promotion as promised, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the heavy cost, by the emotional scars she now carried, deep and unseen. I watched Frank's downfall, but the satisfaction I expected was deeply muted, replaced by the enduring pain of betrayal that still gnawed at me. The immediate crisis was over. We had fought and we had won. But the Miller household remained shadowed by unspoken wounds, a quiet tension simmering beneath the surface, a permanent chill in the air. Frank Jensen's resignation from Jensen Construction came swiftly, a terse notice in the local paper citing personal reasons. The official explanation was flimsy, transparent. Within days, the whispers started, snaking through the diner booths and the grocery aisles. His name, once synonymous with success, now carried the weight of something darker, something vaguely unsavory. His reputation, once sterling, was in tatters, pieced together from half-truths and speculative glances. He wasn't seen much after that, the big house on the hill slowly dimming, a quiet testament to a man who had flown too close to the sun. Sarah secured her promotion. The new title, the larger office, the increased salary, all the things she had fought for were hers. But the joy was muted, thin. The emotional scars she carried ran deeper than any professional triumph could soothe. A pervasive sense of shame gnawed at her, a constant internal hum. She imagined whispers following her, not just about Frank, but about her past, her involvement, however coerced. Her eyes, even when she smiled, held a residual sadness, a wariness that hadn't been there before. We tried to rebuild. We went through the motions, the familiar routines of our life, but the infidelity and its coercive origins cast a long, heavy shadow over our home. Our intimacy, once easy and natural, became strained, a landscape littered with unspoken fears and memories. The trust that had once bound us, solid and unyielding, was now fragile, like antique glass. It required constant effort, painful conversations that often ended with more questions than answers, and a conscious daily choice to move forward or not. Every morning I woke with a familiar knot in my stomach. Resentment, a dull throb, was my constant companion. I'd catch myself replaying the sounds on the recording. The image of Sarah with Frank, knowing it was under duress, but still unable to fully untangle the hurt from the understanding. It was a constant battle within me, a wrestling match between my head and my gut often won. Sarah, too, grappled with her own demons. Her profound shame, her guilt, was a tangible thing in the house. She carried the feeling that she had compromised not only her integrity, but also our sacred marriage vows, even as she understood the impossible corner she'd been backed into. Sometimes she'd just sit, staring into space, a silence so heavy it pressed down on me. We sought counseling, a small room with soft chairs and a woman named Dr. Albright who listened more than she spoke. We laid bare the profound complexities of coercion, betrayal, and the possibility, or impossibility, of true forgiveness. There were days it felt like progress, small steps forward. Other days it felt like we were picking at an open wound, making it worse. Dr. Albright would explain the dynamics of power and control, how an abuser isolates their victim, how shame silences. I heard the words, understood them, but the feeling in my chest remained. The small-town whispers followed Frank Jensen, painting him as a villain, a predator. But they also subtly touched Sarah. A sidelong glance at the grocery store, a sudden hush in a conversation when she walked into a room. She was a victim, yes, but in a small town, a scandal, no matter its origin, stuck to everyone involved. She bore it with a quiet dignity, but I saw the way her shoulders sometimes slumped when she thought I wasn't looking. I continued my work at the auto shop, the smell of oil, the tangible problems of engines. The clear solutions offered a quiet solace. A car either ran or it didn't. The answers were usually in a manual or a diagnostic scan. It was a stark contrast to the tangled, messy people problems that now consume my home life. Here, the world felt orderly, predictable. Our love, I knew, still endured, but it was a love reshaped by fire, forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. It was quieter now, more wary, profoundly changed by the ordeal. The easy laughter, the carefree moments were fewer. We learned to walk around the edges of our pain, acknowledging it without always speaking it. The dream of the house, once so vivid, now felt distant, almost unimportant. Our priorities had been irrevocably altered. The ordeal had forced a new, stark understanding of what truly mattered. Not just possessions or titles, but the fragile architecture of trust, the messy, complicated resilience of the human spirit. We learned that while justice could be served, some prices were paid in the currency of the soul, leaving permanent, indelible marks. Life in our Midwestern town continued, a steady, unchanging rhythm. And we, the Millers, remained, a family scarred but resilient, forever grappling with the complex morality of survival, truth, and the long, silent road to reckoning. The initial weary relief that settled over our home after Frank Jensen's downfall gradually gave way to a persistent unease. It wasn't a loud thing, not a storm, but more like a perpetual gray sky, promising rain that never quite fell. The air in our apartment remained thick with unspoken words, a silence that held more weight than any shouted argument. We had won the battle, but the war, the one being fought within the walls of our marriage, felt far from over. I still found my anchor in the familiar clang and hum of Miller's auto. Engines had problems that could be diagnosed, parts that could be replaced. There was a clear logic to it, a satisfaction in turning a wrench and making something broken run smooth again. My hands, calloused and stained with grease, knew their purpose. I found myself unconsciously seeking reassurance in that predictable rhythm, in the smell of oil and fresh rubber, a stark contrast to the tangled, unfixable emotions waiting for me at home. Sarah, too, threw herself into her work. The promotion, the one she'd risked so much for, now felt like a heavy cloak she wore. She was a full manager, her name on important reports, her schedule packed. She stayed late, not because Frank Jensen demanded it, but because she seemed to find a grim satisfaction in the long hours, a way to regain a sense of control, to prove her worth, perhaps mostly to herself. When she came home, her weariness was a deeper kind now, less about stress and more about a quiet exhaustion of the soul. The town, for all its Midwestern pleasantries, was still a small place. The whispers about Frank had largely faded, replaced by new gossip, but a subtle undercurrent remained. I noticed it in the way some neighbors would nod, but not stop to chat, or the slight coolness in the tone of a casual acquaintance at the hardware store. Nothing overt, nothing anyone could point to, but it was there. A lingering acknowledgement of the storm we had weathered and the debris it had left behind. Our counseling sessions with Dr. Albright became a weekly ritual, a slow, painful excavation of the layers of betrayal, shame, and fractured trust. Sarah spoke of the fear, the feeling of being utterly powerless, the way Frank had chipped away at her resolve until there was nothing left but a desperate need to survive. I spoke of the feeling of being gutted, of the images that still haunted me, the struggle to separate the coercion from the act itself. Dr. Albright listened, asking quiet questions, guiding us without offering easy answers. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip," she'd say, her voice calm. "It's a garden you tend, one painful weed at a time." Intimacy between us remained strained. Our bedroom, once a sanctuary, now held a silent void. The physical distance in our home mirrored the emotional chasm that still existed. We slept in the same bed, but the space between us felt wider than before, an invisible barrier that neither of us quite knew how to cross. The casual touches, the knowing glances, the shared laughter that had once peppered our days were now rare, tentative things. The dream of our house, the small ranch with the yard for a dog, felt suspended, too heavy to approach. We still talked about it sometimes, in hushed, hypothetical tones, but the excitement, the shared vision, had evaporated. It felt like something we had lost, or at least put on a shelf, unable to dust it off and bring it back into the light. Our lives continued, but the future felt less certain, less brightly colored than it once had. One evening, a simple thing, a leaky kitchen faucet, became an unexpected trigger. I'd been meaning to fix it for days, but my mind had been elsewhere. Sarah walked in from work, saw the slow drip, and let out a frustrated sigh. "Dave, are you ever going to get to that?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. "I'll get to it, Sarah," I snapped back, the day's quiet resentments bubbling to the surface. "It's not the end of the world." "No," she said, her voice rising, "but it's just like everything else, isn't it? Half finished, left to drip." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, turning to face her, my own anger flaring. Her eyes welled up, suddenly, unexpectedly. "It means we're still dripping, Dave. Everything is still dripping. We fix one thing and another breaks, and we just keep letting it leak all over everything." The raw, unresolved hurt in her voice caught me off guard. The argument wasn't about the faucet. It was about everything else, the deep, festering wound beneath our fragile truce, still leaking into every corner of our lives. The argument about the leaky faucet, born of a dripping annoyance, had quickly spiraled into a deluge of all the unsaid, all the unresolved. Sarah's tears, my sharp retort, it had ripped open the thin scab we had managed to form. The words exchanged weren't new, but the raw honesty behind them, the depth of the frustration they carried, was. When it was over, not resolved but simply exhausted, we retreated. The silence that followed was colder, more isolating than anything before. The fragile truce, the unspoken agreement to try, was shattered, leaving us both exposed and bleeding in our own corners. I found myself at the garage even earlier each morning, staying later into the evenings. The familiar smell of oil and gasoline became my personal sanctuary. I'd lose myself in the grind of work, in the methodical process of taking things apart and putting them back together. Physical exhaustion, the ache in my shoulders and hands, often overshadowed the emotional fatigue that had plagued me for months. It was a simpler pain, one I knew how to fix with a hot shower and a few hours of sleep, unlike the complicated knots in my chest. I'd come home, eat a quiet dinner Sarah had often left warming, and retreat to the living room with a book or just the silence of the television. Sarah, too, immersed herself in her work. The lights in her new, larger office stayed on well after everyone else had left Jensen Construction. She buried herself in reports, in planning meetings, in the endless tasks of management. The exhaustion was a shield, a way to keep introspection at bay. She moved through our home with a quiet intensity, her eyes often fixed on some distant point. I saw the way she looked at me sometimes, a quick, almost furtive glance, then a turning away. I knew she saw my withdrawal, saw it as further evidence of my unforgiveness, another layer of proof that what she'd done was beyond repair. Our next counseling session felt particularly heavy. Dr. Albright, her gaze calm but perceptive, observed the fresh wounds laid bare from our kitchen fight. The air between us was thick, charged with unspoken resentments. "You both seem on edge," she noted, her voice soft. "Something happened this week that cracked through the usual surface." Sarah spoke first, her voice tight. She talked about the faucet, but quickly moved to the broader frustration, the feeling that nothing was truly fixed. "It's like we're just pretending," she said, her voice wavering. "Pretending that if we just keep busy, it'll all go away. But it's always there, dripping." Then it was my turn. I looked at Dr. Albright, then at Sarah, who wouldn't meet my gaze. "I'm tired," I admitted, the words coming out heavier than I intended. Tired of fighting myself. Tired of trying to untangle it. I know she was coerced. I know that here, I tapped my temple. But here I placed a hand over my heart. It just feels like Like it happened, and I don't know how to make that go away. My voice was raw, the truth of my pain laid bare. I can't seem to separate the coercion from the act itself, the image. It's always there and it still burns. Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes brimming. And I carry it, Dave, she whispered. Every minute, the shame of it, the feeling that I let it happen, that I compromised everything, and that it's going to ruin me, ruin us forever, that there's no way to ever truly clean it off, no matter how much time passes. Her fear of permanent ruin, of being forever tainted by that moment, was palpable. Dr. Albright nodded slowly. You're both carrying immense shame, immense hurt, and right now those individual weights are creating a chasm between you. You're each in your own separate pain, unable to reach across and truly connect. She paused, letting her words sink in. We need to get to the core of what each of you is truly afraid of in this relationship now. What you're afraid to lose, what you're afraid to ask for. She then suggested an exercise, something she called letters from the heart. I want each of you, she said, to write down your deepest hurts, your biggest fears, what you truly need from the other person, but haven't dared to say. Write it all down, no filter, no judgment. We won't read them next session. We'll just bring them, knowing they exist. The idea felt daunting, another impossible task in our shattered emotional landscape. To put it all down on paper, to give form to the formless pain, felt like an act of extreme vulnerability, a risk I wasn't sure I could take. But as I looked at Sarah, her face tear-streaked, a quiet, heavy understanding settled between us. The way we were living, caught in this endless, dripping leak of unresolved pain, was unsustainable. Something had to give. The letters from the heart exercise Dr. Albright had given us proved to be one of the most profoundly difficult tasks we had faced, more so than confronting Frank, more so than enduring the whispers. To sit with a blank piece of paper and stare into the abyss of your own hurt, your own fears, and then try to give it shape with words felt almost impossible. I found myself in the garage again, late one night, a dim work light illuminating the notebook I held. I'd started a dozen times only to crumple the page and toss it aside. How could I articulate the feeling of being gutted without simply blaming Sarah? How could I explain the constant flicker of resentment, the intrusive images, while also acknowledging the profound love that still clung to me like burrs? I wanted to write, I feel betrayed, but then I heard Sarah's desperate voice. He cornered me. I wanted to write, why didn't you stop him? But then I remembered her terror, her fear of losing everything. My pen hovered, suspended between accusation and empathy, between anger and the desperate yearning for the woman I had built my life with. The page remained largely empty, stained with a single tear that had fallen, unbidden, onto the stark white. The sheer effort of trying to disentangle my emotions, to find words that were both true and constructive, was exhausting. Sarah fared no better. I'd see her sitting at the kitchen table, a pen in her hand, a fresh sheet of paper before her. But the paper stayed pristine. Her gaze would be distant, lost in a landscape of shame and guilt. She told me in one of our rare, strained conversations that she couldn't write it. What would I even say, Dave? She'd asked, her voice thin. That I'm sorry? You know that. That I hated every second of it? You know that too. What if I write something that makes you hate me more? What if I write something that finally makes you realize you can't live with this? She was paralyzed by fear, the fear that revealing her deepest vulnerabilities might only confirm her ruin, might push me away for good. The blank pages became a mirror, reflecting her internal struggles and the chasm that still existed between us. One evening, after another silent dinner, I was washing dishes and Sarah was drying. The faint strains of an old country song played on the radio, one we used to listen to on long drives. Without thinking, I hummed a line, and Sarah, almost instinctively, hummed the next. Our eyes met across the sink, and for a fleeting moment, a sliver of the old years passed between us. A fragile connection, like a thread of spider silk, briefly cut through the tension. It was gone almost as quickly as it came, but it was there. A ghost of a shared past, a reminder of what we once were and perhaps what we could be again. At our next counseling session, Dr. Albright looked at us, her expression warm but firm. "So," she began, "the letters, how did that go?" I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of the largely blank pages in my bag. "Hard," I admitted, "really hard. I started it, but finding the right words without just sounding angry or hurt, it felt impossible. It's all so tangled." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I couldn't write anything," she whispered. I just, I couldn't. I was too scared of what it would mean, what it would say about me, and what it would make Dave think." Dirk Albright leaned forward slightly. "And that's okay. The point wasn't necessarily to share them in full, not yet. The point was the act of writing, the act of confronting those feelings within yourselves. The fear you both experience while trying to write, that's just as important to acknowledge." She paused. "Dave, you're struggling to separate the event from the coercion, to forgive the act while understanding the context. Sarah, you're struggling with self-forgiveness, with the weight of shame that you believe has tainted everything." She looked at each of us in turn. "We can't sweep these feelings under the rug. They are real, they're painful, but we have to find a way to acknowledge them without letting them consume you, individually or as a couple." She suggested we each keep our letters, adding to them if we felt able, not for the other person but for ourselves as a way to process. A quiet understanding began to settle in the room. We each carried a heavy, isolating burden. The act of simply acknowledging that internal struggle, even without fully articulating its contents, felt like a tiny, hesitant step. We still had no easy answers, no magic solutions. But as we left Dr. Albright's office that day, there was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. The silence between us wasn't as cold. It was still heavy, but perhaps a little less crushing. We had to keep trying. We both knew that much. The letters from the heart continued, a private, painful ritual in the quiet corners of our apartment. We didn't share them, not yet, but the act of putting pen to paper became its own form of catharsis. I spent evenings in the garage again, the notebook resting on my workbench amidst the tools, trying to articulate the knot of anger and sorrow in my chest. I wrote about the burning image, the feeling of betrayal, but also about the years of shared laughter, of building a life. It was a struggle to write my truth without letting it become a weapon, to acknowledge the wound without pouring salt in it. Sarah, too, wrestled with her letter. I'd sometimes catch her at the kitchen table late at night, the lamp casting a soft glow on her intent face, her pen moving slowly across the page. Her words, she later told Dr. Albright, were mostly about the shame, the feeling of being tainted, the loss of her own self-respect. She wrote about the impossible choice, the terror, the hollow victory, and the constant fear that she was forever marked, not just to me, but to herself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, tiny shifts began to occur in our daily lives. A shared glance over morning coffee that held a flicker of the old understanding, a hand brushing mine as we reached for the same dish, and the touch lingered for a fraction of a second longer. A brief, genuine laugh at something mundane on the television, cutting through the heavy silence before retreating back into quiet. These were not grand gestures, not moments of profound reconciliation, but faint echoes of the trust that once bound us, glimmers of the people we had been. They were fragile, easily broken, but they were there. The town, of course, was still the town. The subtle judgment, the sidelong glances, they hadn't entirely vanished. Sarah still carried that awareness, that invisible weight, when we went out. I saw it in the shirt she held her shoulders, a slight stiffness, a guardedness. It was a constant reminder that our ordeal, however privately resolved, remained part of our public story, a detail whispered and speculated upon. Sarah continued to excel at work. Her new role as manager demanded her full attention, and she gave it. She was competent, efficient, respected by her colleagues. Yet, I could sense the underlying current of her own self-doubt. Sometimes I'd see her staring out the window, her gaze distant, and I knew she was battling the lingering shadow of Frank, of what he had forced her to endure, of the self she felt she had lost. But I also saw her resilience, her fierce determination to reclaim her dignity, to prove her worth. It was a strength I hadn't always recognized in her, and it sparked a reluctant admiration in me, a small ember of pride that glowed amidst my pain. At our next counseling session, Dr. Albright greeted us with her usual calm demeanor. "Have you brought your letters?" she asked, her eyes meeting ours. We both nodded, the notebooks clutched tightly in our laps. "You don't have to read the whole thing," she said gently, "but perhaps a passage, something that felt important to write down, something that feels safe enough to share, even just a little." My turn came first. I opened my notebook to a page I'd barely finished, my handwriting a little shaky. I read, "I struggle to separate the coercion from the act. I know what he did to you, Sarah, and that burns a hole in my gut. But I can't shake the image, the feeling that something precious between us was violated, even if you were violated first. The pain isn't just for you, it's for us, and I don't know how to move past that, how to see us without seeing him." My voice was a little rough, raw with the effort of articulation, but I kept my gaze steady on Dr. Albright, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her hands trembled as she opened her notebook. She took a deep breath. I wrote that I feel dirty. Like no matter how many times I wash, I can't get clean. And I'm so scared that this feeling, that what happened, is going to define me forever. Not just to myself, but to you, Dave. That I'll never be whole again, and that you'll never see me as whole again. I need to forgive myself, but I don't know how, and I need you to understand that, more than anything. Her voice broke on the last few words, tears welling in her eyes. A profound silence filled the room. This was the first time we had truly spoken, not just at each other, but to each other, from the depths of our individual pains. The words hung in the air, heavy but real. It was a moment of raw, shared vulnerability, a crack in the formidable wall that had stood between us. We were both exposed, both hurting, but for the first time in a long time, we were hurting in the same room together. The emotional toll of this openness was immense. We left the session drained, exhausted, but with a faint, almost imperceptible sense of relief. It wasn't a breakthrough in the traditional sense, not a sudden solution, but it was a beginning, a recognition that rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past, but about constructing something new, something that acknowledged the scars but chose to build despite them. The dream of the house, once a symbol of escape, began to transform, slowly into a symbol of resilience, a place where we might one day find a new kind of peace. The counseling sessions with Dr. Albright began to shift, moving from the raw excavation of pain to the slower, more deliberate work of laying new foundations. It was less about what had happened and more about how we would live with it. Dr. Albright gave us exercises, not for words but for action. Small, deliberate choices to reconnect, to acknowledge, to rebuild. I started practicing acceptance, a concept that felt foreign and forced at first. When the intrusive images of Sarah and Frank would surface, I'd consciously push them back, not with anger, but with a quiet, internal redirect. I'd remind myself of Sarah's fear, her coercion, the truth that she had been a victim. It was a painstaking process, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But it was an effort. I found myself paying extra attention to Sarah's car when it came into the shop for its regular service, wiping down the dashboard, checking the tire pressure with an almost ritualistic care. It was a small, unspoken way of showing I was still here, still tending to her world, even when the bigger parts felt so broken. Sarah, too, sought her own avenues for healing. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter on Saturdays, cleaning kennels, walking dogs. She'd come home smelling faintly of dog shampoo, a different kind of exhaustion in her eyes, but also a quiet sense of accomplishment. She told me it felt good to care for something, to make a small, tangible difference. She began to speak of self-forgiveness, not as a grand, instantaneous event, but as a slow, deliberate process, acknowledging her own resilience in the face of what she had endured. I saw glimpses of the determined woman I had married, the one who didn't back down easily, even from her own demons. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly quiet workday, Sarah suggested ordering takeout from the Thai place down the street. It was something we used to do often, before everything. We sat at the kitchen table, the plastic containers between us, and talked about our days. She recounted a minor office drama, and I told her about a particularly stubborn engine. Stubborn engine I'd finally coaxed back to life. There was no forced cheer, no underlying tension, just conversation. It was ordinary, mundane even, but in its ordinariness, it felt monumental. A fragile testament to the slow, deliberate efforts we were both making. The food tasted better that night. The topic of the house, the small ranch with the big yard, began to resurface. Not as a frantic dream of escape anymore, but as something else, something more grounded. I saw a for sale sign on the Miller place on the highway, Sarah mentioned one morning, her voice casual. The one with the big oak tree. I knew the one. We'd admired it for years. That afternoon after work, I found myself driving by it. Then Sarah and I drove by it together a few days later, sitting in the truck as the late afternoon sun painted the windows. We talked about a garden, about fixing the porch swing. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol, not of leaving our troubles behind, but of building a new future, scarred but resilient, on firmer ground. Then an unexpected call came for Sarah. It was from a woman named Carol, a former colleague from Jensen Construction, who'd heard the whispers about Frank Jensen's departure and recognized a familiar pattern. Carol shared her own story of Frank's insidious harassment, the veiled threats, the isolation. She had quit, unable to fight him, but she had seen it. This external validation, the knowledge that Sarah was not alone, that others had suffered under his predatory hand, seemed to lift a small part of the crushing weight from Sarah's shoulders. She spent a long time on the phone with Carol, and when she hung up, her face was still pale, but there was a new resolve in her eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Watching Sarah in the following weeks, seeing her newfound purpose, the way she carried herself, I started to see the woman I married more clearly, pushing past the painful images that still lingered. The sharp edges of betrayal, while still present, began to dull, smoothed by time and the conscious effort we both poured into our healing. My heart, which had felt like a hardened knot for so long, started to soften slowly, tentatively. Our path was still challenging. There were days when the silence between us felt heavy again, days when the old hurts resurfaced. But there was a fragile, conscious choice taking root, a quiet agreement to face it all together. The journey of rebuilding wasn't a sprint. It was a long, arduous trek, requiring continuous effort, an acknowledgement that healing was a gradual, ongoing process, like the slow, steady turn of the seasons in our Midwestern town. We were both still a little broken, but we were choosing to mend, one painstaking stitch at a time. Our counseling sessions with Dr. Albright continued, but the focus had subtly shifted. We were no longer digging through the wreckage so much as looking at the plans for a new construction. It was about mutual understanding, about learning how to communicate the lingering pains without letting them derail the forward momentum. Dr. Albright often reminded us that healing wasn't about erasing the scars, but about learning to live with them, about letting them tell a story of survival, not just of injury. I found myself actively working on separating Sarah's identity from Frank's actions. It wasn't just a mental exercise anymore. It was a conscious, emotional effort. When the unwelcome images still tried to surface, I'd force myself to overlay them with the sight of Sarah laughing at the animal shelter, her face bright, or her calm, focused expression as she tackled a complex problem at work. I began to see her resilience, her fierce determination, not just as a defense mechanism, but as an inherent part of the woman I loved, a strength that had always been there, now sharpened by adversity. Sarah, for her part, continued her volunteer work, finding a quiet, profound strength in caring for creatures that needed her. She spoke less about shame and more about clarity. She was learning to process what had happened, not as a reflection of her worth, but as an act perpetrated against her. Her journey towards self-forgiveness was a slow tide, steadily washing away the accumulated guilt, leaving behind a harder, clearer understanding of herself. One cold, clear evening, after putting away the supper dishes, we sat on the couch wrapped in a comfortable old quilt. The TV was off, the only light from a single lamp. "You know," Sarah began, her voice soft, "I went back and read those letters again, the ones Dr. Albright had us write." I nodded, my own letter, still mostly unwritten, a faint ghost in my mind. "Me too. Couldn't bring myself to finish it, though." She looked at me then, her eyes direct. I think I think I understand some of what you wrote in yours. The part about seeing him when you look at me. It's a heavy thing. She paused, took a breath. I want you to know, Dave, that when I look in the mirror, I don't see him. I see the choices I made to survive. And I see a woman who's trying to put herself back together, brick by brick. For me, for us. The air between us seemed to lighten, the unspoken burdens easing, just a little. For the first time, we talked about our letters, not in the formal setting of counseling, but in the quiet intimacy of our living room. We spoke of fears and hurts, but also of hopes, not for judgment or absolution, but for deeper connection. It was a conversation that stretched late into the night, raw and painful in moments, but ultimately profoundly healing. The emotional distance that had separated us for so long began to recede, like a fog lifting. That night, for the first time in months, I reached for her hand as we lay in bed. She didn't flinch. Her fingers intertwined with mine, a tentative but genuine connection. Intimacy, physical and emotional, was slowly, carefully re-emerging, a conscious effort from both of us built on the fragile foundation of these new, honest conversations. It wasn't a sudden return to what was, but a gentle exploration of what could be, a new kind of closeness forged in fire. The dream of the house, the Miller place with the big oak tree, had never truly left us. Now it felt less like a dream and more like a plan. We drove by it again, the for sale sign still planted firmly in the yard. The next day, after a long discussion, we called the real estate agent. Our offer was modest, reflecting our new understanding of what truly mattered, a future built on shared strength rather than material desire. A week later, the call came. The offer was accepted. A quiet, hopeful excitement settled over us. It wasn't the giddy joy of youth, but a deeper, more profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a house, it was a tangible step, a shared commitment to a future that felt, for the first time in a long time, within our grasp. The town's whispers, which had once felt so pervasive, now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. We still caught a stray glance or an averted gaze now and then, but they held less power. Our focus had turned inward, towards each other, towards the hard, rewarding work of rebuilding. I found a renewed sense of partnership, recognizing Sarah's unwavering strength not as something separate, but as integral to our collective future. Sarah, too, found a growing peace. Her choice to stay, to fight, to rebuild, had solidified her sense of self. She knew her worth wasn't defined by Frank Jensen's predatory actions, nor by the shame she had carried. It was defined by her resilience, her courage, and her willingness to face the difficult truths. Our love, forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival, was settling into a deep, resilient bond. It was different now, quieter perhaps, but infinitely stronger for having been tested. We understood that our future wasn't built on forgetting what had happened, but on enduring it, learning from it, and growing together one painstaking step at a time on a new kind of foundation. The Miller place, with its wide porch and the towering oak in the front yard, became ours. The keys felt heavy and significant in my hand, not just metal, but a symbol of a new kind of beginning. Moving in was a slow, deliberate process. Each box unpacked held not just dishes or books, but memories, some painful, some comforting, and a quiet, tenacious hope for the future. I threw myself into the renovations, fixing a leaky roof, sanding old floorboards, painting the walls a fresh, clean white. The physical work was a solace. It was tangible, a clear equation of effort equaling results, mirroring the painstaking effort we were putting into our emotional rebuilding. Sarah, too, embraced her new role at Jensen Construction, her competence undeniable, her confidence quietly restored. Her Saturdays at the animal shelter continued, a gentle act of self-care, a way to ground herself in simple, direct good. The town's whispers, once a low hum, gradually faded. Respect, earned through quiet endurance, began to replace judgment. Our relationship was different now. Scarred, yes, but deeper, built on a conscious choice to stay and to fight. Intimacy returned, not as an effortless given, but as a deliberate act of care and understanding. We learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain into the fabric of our lives, allowing it to temper us, not break us. The cost had been immense, paid in trust and peace, but we had chosen to endure, to rebuild, brick by painstaking brick, on a foundation stronger than before. Life, imperfect but real, went on. The Miller place, with its wide porch and the towering oak in the front yard, became ours. The keys felt heavy and significant in my hand, not just metal, but a symbol of a new kind of beginning. Moving in was a slow, deliberate process. Each box unpacked held not just dishes or books, but memories, some painful, some comforting, and a quiet, tenacious hope for the future. I threw myself into the renovations, fixing a leaky roof, sanding old floorboards, painting the walls a fresh, clean white. The physical work was a solace. It was tangible, a clear equation of effort equaling results, mirroring the painstaking effort we were putting into our emotional rebuilding. Sarah, too, embraced her new role at Jensen Construction, her competence undeniable, her confidence quietly restored. Her Saturdays at the animal shelter continued, a gentle act of self-care, a way to ground herself in simple, direct good. The town's whispers, once a low hum, gradually faded. Respect, earned through quiet endurance, began to replace judgment. Our relationship was different now. Scarred, yes, but deeper, built on a conscious choice to stay and to fight. Intimacy returned, not as an effortless given, but as a deliberate act of care and understanding. We learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain into the fabric of our lives, allowing it to temper us, not break us. The cost had been immense, paid in trust and peace, but we had chosen to endure, to rebuild, brick by painstaking brick, on a foundation stronger than before. Life, imperfect but real, went on.